So, Sri Akal, welcome to Amma Brown Girl. My name's Amma. On today's episode, I'll be talking about a Desi identity crisis that so many of us, including me, go through, and I feel like I have to live a double life. If you're new to my podcast, you'll quickly realize I'm quite an open person and I don't care too much about social pressure or social norms. I put myself out there by having this podcast and I choose to live quite authentically, but that ultimately means that I'm somewhat vulnerable to people thinking my choices are negative. When I say I don't care, I don't, but that's somewhat of a lie because how can I not care? When you have family members and relatives constantly telling you that we're not proud, you're an embarrassment, take your podcast down, you're ruining the family, it doesn't leave me feeling the most enthusiastic about my choices. When you hear it enough times, of course it takes a toll, but I think I'm quite a strong person and I've been through enough to know that this is exactly what I want to do, that I can't listen to the outside noise. I want people to hear my story and I don't want people to feel alone, that there's a bigger picture to this podcast. This takes me on to today's topic because I recently got a life coach and it has by far been one of the best experiences I've ever had. I got to talk about everything and anything and the things that I struggle with. The one thing that really stood out to me was the fact that I really battle with balancing my two lives. I got to establish that my two lives consist of this Desi Amma that wants to be validated by her parents, and then there's this independent, bold, authentic Amma who wants to live life very freely. The Desi Amma is obviously very different to authentic Amma. Desi Amma bites her tongue to keep the peace. Weaponized incompetence is expected of me, which if you haven't heard of before, weaponized incompetence is when, for example, if my dad asks me to do something just because he can, even though he's absolutely capable of doing it himself, it's just that he's probably lazy or, can't be bothered or just doesn't want to put in the brain power. And because he knows I will always say yes and I don't have the space to say no, he will come and ask me to help him with something without even considering if I've got commitments or I'm in the middle of something. It's just expected of me to complete whatever he's asked me to do. It's nothing that difficult either, but he just asked me because he knows he can and I won't say no. Desi Amma also has the expectation of marrying a man and having kids and settling down and, living that typical straight Indian life, I guess. Then the authentic Amma is a lot more self-aware, independent, and doesn't bite her tongue when it comes to calling out family members or relatives for saying outrageous things. Authentic Amma takes more risks and has no limitations to how far I can go in my life, especially when it comes to my love life, because authentic Amma isn't pressured to fit into one box. After talking to my coach, they set me some homework to actually figure out what I think these both sides of me owe to my parents. After doing that exercise, they set me a new task to find a way to actually merge those personalities and pick out what I think suits me, and then I can kind of align myself, which I'm yet to journal about. But the one thing that again stood out to me was the fact that I gave myself permission to acknowledge the fact that I do have these two sides and I do battle with them, because for a long time I thought, well, I have to pick one, but I don't. I get to make my life and my choices and my personality whatever it is that I want to be. And for the fact that I was put into a position to have to choose is so unfair. Living a double life typically refers to living two separate personas or identities. Within the context of cultural identities, especially amongst Desis, this is when you have a hard time navigating between cultural heritage, environments, and cultural expectations of who you really want to be. Many Desis find themselves code switching or changing their language or mannerisms, and sometimes even their beliefs depending on who they're with. This example I shared of my personal story with my coach was more of a recent one, but in terms of my identity crisis and living a double life, it was way worse when I was living at home. Being at home felt like I was in a cage, and the only time I felt somewhat better was when I was at school because I had some breathing space. I'm sure many people can relate to that feeling. I used to lie a lot too, to the point it was small things and insignificant things, but it was because I felt like I had no choice. I became so good at lying that I made my parents believe I was this good daughter. Slowly, when they started to clock on, and in some instances I got caught, there was a lot of mental, emotional, and physical abuse. If I lie, I get in trouble. And if I tell the truth, I get in trouble or I'm stopped from doing what I want to do, which wasn't anything crazy either. It was just me being a teenager, wanting to go out, hang out with my friends, nothing insane. But because I knew whatever I said wouldn't matter and I would get in trouble anyway. As a 16-year-old, I thought, wow, this is genius. I might as well just go and be reckless. But it meant that I had no real support system or any safe adults to rely on. So when I turned 18 and I left for uni, that was the first time I had real freedom where I had my own room. I didn't have to ask my parents to go anywhere. I could go out anytime. There was so much freedom that I felt feral. I didn't know what to do with it. During the first months, I did go home, but over time, I just went home less and less and less. I had no reason to because aside from being busy with uni, I could just easily leave anytime I wanted, especially if there was like an argument and I was like, sod this, see you bye. I even had periods where some lasted a month and some was even a year where I wasn't talking to my parents because I went no contact. And then sometimes it was great, but yeah, uni was my first ever experience of tasting real freedom and living authentically. And it was so mind-blowing to me that, wow, a bit overwhelming at times. And even when I, looked at some of my friends and I was like, wow, you guys have never really gone through this, that, you going wherever you want and living authentically without your parents being on your neck was quite eye-opening. After my first year of uni, I didn't even tell my parents my address after moving out of student halls because I just wanted that kind of freedom and I was kind of afraid that they would turn up when they would want to. And there were times that they did, which I'm so glad I didn't tell them. The only time I would tell them my address is when I finally felt comfortable enough or when I was coming to the end of my lease. If I could pinpoint when I started to live a double life, it was probably puberty. Because obviously I was physically developing, I had an interest in boys. In my parents' brain, they probably thought, right, lock her up, that's it, all freedom gone, she doesn't need to go out. But that only made me lie more and it made me really sneaky. So by the time I was eventually allowed to go out with my friends, I became even more sneakier because with the little bit of freedom that I had, I took the maximum piss with it. But I still knew that I couldn't act out of line in public because just in case an uncle sees me and then reports back to my parents, just that anxiety was not worth it. So I took the maximum piss, but with a lot of care and precaution. For many Desis, the issue lies within reconciling the traditional values, norms, and expectations that are upheld by their families compared to living a more modern or Western lifestyle. A thing that I grew up hearing a lot of the time was, baddi gori aayi hai, apne jitto gori bandi hai, which means that she's a wannabe white girl or that she just wants to be white or Western or live a more open lifestyle. Living with that duality is emotionally difficult. It made me feel really disconnected from my culture and my parents, as well as feeling really guilty because I was so confused about my identity. Being brought up as a British Asian was difficult at times, and I even hated my culture at some points. I just wanted to be everything but Asian. The influence that chat shit aunties had on me was heavy because you'd always hear some auntie saying, oh, did you hear so-and-so's daughter with this boy? Did you hear so-and-so's daughter at this club? Which, by the way, is just any bar in central London past the time of 7 p.m. I would say the pressure is there for men, but I think women have it way worse. I feel that the older generation, especially with the chat shit aunties, should be happy that the younger generation have the space to actually explore their identities rather than ending up in unhappy marriages or even abusive marriages, like a lot of these chat shit aunties. In social situations where I'm with relatives who are super backwards or racist or have a village mentality, I know that I have to be on my best behavior. There's certain things I can't talk about because in the fear of them gossiping about it or, God forbid, bringing shame on my family. When I'm around them, I feel this extra pressure to follow their traditional values, but on the inside, I know I'm a lesbian. Having to feel like I need to choose between my parents' expectations and love is immoral and just a shame, honestly. I will always choose myself, but having to make that decision in the first place is so painful because I do love my parents and I want them in my life, but I know that them fully embracing me will never be a possibility. Living a double life, especially when it comes to love, is so exhausting. Having to feel like I needed to hide that big secret just to avoid backlash was sad. And how this fear of judgment and conflict makes you feel forced to live a double life. And I say forced based off my personal experience because I never wanted to lie. I never wanted to hide this thing from my parents. I wanted to be open, but they never gave me the space to do that. And I'm sure so many people can relate to that. I do at times believe that ignorance is bliss, especially when it comes to your safety. But how long must we live like that? I have friends who still have a curfew and have to ask their parents to go out, which I'm so understanding of, but is marriage the only escape? There's this popular saying in Desi culture that it's quite common for our parents to say, "Viato baj," or ਜਦੋਂ ਤੇਰਾ ਵਿਆਹ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਫਿਰ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਤੂੰ ਕਰਨਾ ਤੂੰ ਫੇਰ ਕਰੀ, ਹੁਣ ਨਹੀਂ, ਤੂੰ ਹਜੇ ਕੁਆਰੀ ਆ। ਵਿਆਹ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ means after marriage, and the second bit that I said means do what you want after marriage because you're still unmarried. That saying makes me feel so uncomfortable because it means that our parents think we're only allowed to have freedom once we have a husband or that title of marriage. The amount of times I've heard my friends say that they feel that marriage is the only escape they have for them, not because they hate their parents, but because they are adults and they want to experience an authentic life, what it feels like to just go outside without having someone watching you. I don't understand why our culture sees independence as such a taboo, especially for women. Number one, it baffles me. And number two, it's so common. I can't imagine having my child feel like they need to lie to me about their choices in the fear of judgment just because I want to uphold my status. This is why it becomes increasingly important to address these issues of people feeling like they need to live a double life. It is essential for us to acknowledge these internal conflicts and create discussion around them because they are far more common than we think. By talking openly about these experiences, we contribute to a more inclusive conversation and encourage others to embrace their full selves without the fear of losing a part of their identity. And to be clear, as I said, ignorance is bliss. Our families don't need to know every single little detail about us, especially if you're Desi. But when it gets to the point where you feel like you're making decisions to please your family, you will never know your true self. There will be a point in your life where you think, what if? Remember, we die at the end of this. Embracing both cultural identities can be a journey filled with challenges, but it also leads to deeper personal growth. And it's helpful to adopt a mindset of curiosity and openness. What aspects of your cultural identity resonate with you? What traditions or practices do you cherish? It would be criminal if I hadn't mentioned journaling at least once in my episode, but it can be a great way to articulate your feelings and identify the elements of both cultures that you want to embrace. Instead of viewing the demands of both identities as conflicting, consider them as complementary. Your cultural heritage can amplify your experience in diverse environments. Authenticity plays a crucial role in embracing your full identity. When you present your authentic self, you're more likely to have deeper connections with others, which can ultimately help with feeling like there's a sense of belonging. And I must say, since coming out to my dad, even though he pisses me off at least 4 times a week, I do feel closer with him. Like, there are things that I still withhold from him because ignorance is bliss. There are things that he doesn't need to know. But I have seen that he is more open with me, that he shares a lot more things with me. And I'm grateful for the relationship we have, even though I maintain a little bit of distance. But that is just for myself and my own boundaries and making sure that I put myself first. I'm not saying follow in my footsteps, but take it as a small win. I'm at a point now where recognizing that I have a dual identity is a strength rather than something that I need to pick and choose between, because I get to pick and choose what I get to keep. The ability to navigate through these two personalities gives me more adaptability. It's definitely not easy, but there is progress being made. It's taken me 10 years to get to the point that I am, and it will probably take a lot of therapy to get to where I want to be. Even though I've moved out and I'm a proud South Asian queer woman, I live alone, I'm unmarried, I don't have any kids, I don't know what the hell I'm doing with my life. That pressure of being the perfect South Asian woman is something that I think will never leave me. I hope it does, but I feel like it's so deeply ingrained in me that I don't know how to. But I know by talking about it, recognizing it, sharing my story, and seeking therapy will help me get to the place of feeling more balanced. That almost brings me to the end of this episode, but before I do, I ask myself a question, and I also ask you to ask yourself this question. If I know my parents will never accept me, they will never love me the way that I need, and no matter what I do, they will always remind me of my mistakes and taunt me with, what will people think? What will people say? Why do I need to make myself feel smaller? Is it because I want them to love me? Is it because I want them to validate me? Do I want acceptance and inclusivity? I think for me, if I'm being really honest with myself, it's a mix of all of them. But in reality, if I know how they make me feel and the horrible things that they say to me, what is the point of me worrying when I don't know what my life holds? If they do decide to come around, or if they don't, it is something that is completely out of my control. I'm not going to hold my breath, but I guess time will tell. As we reach the end of this episode, I want to take a moment to reflect on this journey that we've taken together, the evaluation of identity, and the challenges that come with navigating two identities. It can be overwhelming, but it's a journey filled with richness and depth. I genuinely believe that our stories, both unique and beautiful, are what connect us, that they remind you that you're not alone. As you move forward, I really encourage you to keep these conversations alive, both with yourself and others. Take a moment to reflect on your experiences and the lessons that they've taught you. Thank you for being a part of this discussion today. I truly appreciate this opportunity to share this space with you. I hope you continue to explore your identity with kindness. Remember that you are enough just as you are. Until next time, take care of yourself, embrace your authenticity, and know that every chapter of your life is important. I thank you so much for watching. I thank you so much for listening. Thank you. Dhanyavad. Sat Sri Akal. Bye.